In a parking lot, a police officer stopped a black man, unaware he was the governor's chief of staff. Humiliation, a gathering crowd, and rolling cameras turned an ordinary day into a scandal that shook the entire state. What happened next would surprise even the most jaded. But let's start from the beginning. It was a spring evening in the city center when Joshua Carter, a sharply dressed black man in his mid-40s, exited a building after a long meeting. Joshua wasn't just any passerby. He was the governor's chief of staff, well known for spearheading police reform efforts. His footsteps echoed through the nearly deserted street as he approached his black sedan. Just as he retrieved his keys, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Hey!" It was cold and commanding. "What are you doing here?" Joshua turned to see a white police officer. Thin, tense, with a wary expression. "This is my car, officer," Joshua replied calmly, though he felt the all-too-familiar tension rising within him. The officer, identifying himself as Officer Williams, smirked and stepped closer. "License, registration, and ID." "Are you serious?" Joshua asked, reaching for his wallet. "I haven't done anything wrong." "Routine check," Williams interrupted curtly, snatching the documents. His expression grew more arrogant. "You look suspicious." As Williams reviewed the papers, passers-by began to notice. Some stopped, watching as Joshua stood calmly with his arms crossed while the officer ran his information. One person pulled out their phone to record. "So," Williams sneered after handing back the documents, "you're some kind of big shot in the governor's office? Sounds made up." "I assure you it's not," Joshua replied evenly. "Now, if you're done, I'd like to continue my evening." "Not so fast," Williams said, stepping closer. "Are you one of those people who think they're above the law?" Joshua maintained his composure, though the tension thickened. "Officer, I'm a government official, and your actions are overstepping your authority." A young woman in the growing crowd raised her phone. "This is racism," she shouted. "Leave him alone!" Williams dismissed her with a wave, oblivious to how his behavior was being documented. The crowd grew, their murmurs intensifying as the situation escalated. Joshua stayed composed, but recognized that things could spiral out of control. "You think these people will help you?" Williams asked, gesturing at the onlookers. "You're nobody here." Joshua raised a hand to the crowd. "Please remain calm. I'll handle this." At that moment, another patrol car arrived. A woman with a sharp gaze and commanding presence stepped out. Sergeant Megan Diaz. She surveyed the scene, the crowd, the phones, the tense exchange between Joshua and Williams. "Williams, what's going on here?" she demanded. "Detaining a suspicious individual," Williams said, motioning toward Joshua. "Claims he's the governor's chief of staff." Diaz froze. Her expression shifted as she turned to Joshua. "Mr. Carter?" she asked, her voice tinged with shock. "Yes," Joshua said icily, "and your officer is clearly abusing his authority." Williams blinked in confusion. "Wait, who is he?" "He's the governor's chief of staff," Diaz replied firmly, "and one of the key figures behind our state's police reform initiatives." Williams paled, realizing the gravity of his actions. Yet instead of retreating, he stammered an excuse. I didn't know. He could have been anyone." "And you assumed he was suspicious because he's black and well-dressed?" Diaz shot back, crossing her arms. The crowd began to clap, and the woman recording yelled, "It's all on video! We'll show the truth!" Joshua stepped forward, his gaze piercing. "This isn't just your mistake, officer. It's a symptom of everything wrong with the system, and I intend to fix it." The crowd roared in approval. Williams tried to speak, but Diaz cut him off. "We'll discuss this at the station. I'm relieving you now." Williams stepped back, visibly shaken. Joshua turned, offering a parting remark. "Consider this a lesson. But remember, lessons like these often come at too high a price for people like me." By the next morning, the incident had gone viral. Videos recorded by witnesses captured every moment, from Williams' demeaning remarks to Sergeant Diaz's intervention. Joshua's composed but firm demeanor became a symbol of the fight for justice and equality. Comments flooded social media. How many incidents like this go unnoticed? He's lucky he's Joshua Carter. What happens to those who aren't? Shame on our city's police! National news outlets picked up the story. Panels of experts, activists, and politicians debated systemic racism in law enforcement. Within the police department, chaos erupted. Williams was summoned to an emergency meeting with his superiors. "I was just doing my job," he protested. "How was I supposed to know who he was?" "It doesn't matter who he was," his chief snapped. "You violated basic principles of policing. Now we have a crisis." Sergeant Diaz spoke up, her voice steady. "This isn't just about one officer. It's about a broken system that enables these actions." The chief sighed, wiping his brow. "Williams is suspended pending investigation, but we need to act fast to contain this." Meanwhile, Joshua was summoned to the governor's office. Key officials gathered, their expressions grim. Governor Ellen Mitchell began. "Joshua, I'm deeply sorry for what you endured, but we need to decide how to turn this into meaningful change." Joshua leaned forward, his tone measured but resolute. "Apologies won't fix this. We've stalled on reforms for too long. If we don't act now, we risk losing public trust forever." He outlined a plan. Mandatory training on bias and community engagement for all officers. An independent civilian oversight committee to handle complaints against police. A statewide audit of law enforcement practices to identify systemic issues. As officials debated, protests erupted outside police headquarters. Crowds waved signs reading, "Justice Now" and "End Police Bias." QR codes linked to petitions demanding Williams' resignation and immediate reforms circulated widely. That evening, Joshua appeared on a major news program. The host asked, "Mr. Carter, you could have walked away. Why did you choose to stand your ground?" Joshua looked directly into the camera. "Because walking away would have ended the story on that parking lot. But how many stories like mine go untold? I didn't do this for myself. I did it for everyone who can't." His words struck a chord, garnering millions of shares online. The following day, Governor Mitchell held a press conference. With Joshua by her side, she announced sweeping reforms, including the creation of a civilian oversight board, mandatory bias training, and stricter accountability measures for officers. Joshua addressed the crowd. "Yesterday, I stood where millions have stood before, judged not by my actions but by my appearance. Today, we stand together to demand a better system." His speech was met with thunderous applause. As for Officer Williams, he faced a disciplinary hearing. The footage of his actions played before a review board that included both police officials and community members. The verdict was swift. Williams was dismissed, and his conduct referred to prosecutors for further investigation. Meanwhile, Joshua continued meeting with activists and law enforcement leaders, bridging divides with his unwavering commitment to change. Sergeant Diaz, now a reform advocate within the department, pledged, "We're ready to learn, but we need someone to guide us." Joshua's response was firm. "It won't be easy, but if you're committed, I'll stand with you every step of the way." A month later, a citywide rally drew thousands. Joshua stood before the crowd, his voice steady. "This fight isn't over. Change isn't a moment. It's a movement. And together, we will keep pushing forward." The applause was deafening. Among the crowd, a woman held a sign that read, "Thank you, Joshua, for giving us hope." This parking lot encounter became the catalyst for profound change, a reminder that even small acts of resistance can spark a revolution.